On the morning of January 30th, 1945, as Soviet artillery thundered across the frozen Oder River, SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler stood in his Berlin office reviewing blueprints that would haunt history. The maps spread before him detailed not factories or fortifications, but the infrastructure of industrialized death, the crematoria of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the gas chambers of Majdanek, the underground slave labor factories carved into German mountains. This was the domain of a man who merged engineering precision with genocidal efficiency, a technocrat of terror whose post-war disappearance would spawn decades of speculation, conspiracy theories, and unanswered questions. Born on August 26, 1898 in Stettin, Germany, now Szczecin, Poland, Hans Friedrich Karl Franz Kammler entered a world on the cusp of modernity. The son of a Prussian civil servant, young Hans demonstrated an aptitude for mathematics and spatial reasoning that would eventually channel into architecture and civil engineering. He studied at the Technical University of Munich and later at the Technical University of Berlin-Charlottenburg, institutions that shaped Germany's engineering elite. By 1922, Kammler had earned his doctorate in civil engineering, writing his dissertation on the technical aspects of reinforced concrete construction. It was unremarkable work, the product of a methodical mind concerned with load-bearing calculations and structural integrity. Nothing in these early years suggested the monstrous applications to which he would later apply his expertise. The Weimar Republic's economic chaos and political instability created fertile ground for extremism, and Kammler, like many middle-class Germans, gravitated toward the promises of order and national renewal offered by the National Socialist movement. He joined the Nazi Party on May 1, 1932, receiving membership number 1,145,977. More significantly, he joined the SS, the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's elite paramilitary organization, in 1933, shortly after the Nazi seizure of power. His SS number, 113,619, marked his entry into an organization that would evolve from a personal bodyguard unit into the primary instrument of Nazi genocide and terror. According to documents preserved in the National Archives and examined by historian Michael Neufeld in his book, The Rocket and the Reich, Kammler's early SS career focused on administrative construction projects. He worked within the SS main office for budget and buildings, a bureaucratic posting that belied its sinister purpose, constructing the physical infrastructure of the Nazi police state. Kammler proved exceptionally skilled at translating ideological objectives into concrete reality. He understood that the Third Reich's grand ambitions, territorial expansion, racial purification, total war, required logistical systems, buildings, and facilities designed with ruthless efficiency. By the mid-1930s, Kammler had caught the attention of Heinrich Himmler, the Reichsführer SS and architect of the Holocaust. Himmler recognized in Kammler a rare combination: technical brilliance coupled with ideological commitment and absolute moral flexibility. While many engineers might balk at certain applications of their skills, Kammler demonstrated no such qualms. He approached every project, whether a barracks, a bunker, or a gas chamber, with the same dispassionate professionalism. To Kammler, engineering problems had engineering solutions, and ethical considerations were irrelevant obstacles to optimal design. In 1941, as Germany's invasion of the Soviet Union unleashed a new phase of Nazi violence, Kammler's career accelerated dramatically. He received promotion to SS Brigade Führer and assumed leadership of Amtsgruppe C, Office Group C, within the SS main economic and administrative office. This division controlled all construction activities within the concentration camp system, a sprawling network of imprisonment, forced labor, and extermination that would ultimately consume millions of lives. The winter of 1942 brought Hans Kammler to the most infamous address in history, Auschwitz-Birkenau, located in occupied Poland near the town of Oświęcim. Here, amid the flat, swampy terrain of Upper Silesia, the SS had established what would become the largest German concentration and extermination camp complex. When Kammler arrived for his inspection tour in early 1942, Auschwitz was undergoing massive expansion. The original camp, Auschwitz I, built in former Polish army barracks, had proven insufficient for the SS's plans. Construction had begun on Auschwitz II, known as Birkenau, which would eventually cover nearly 500 acres and hold over 100,000 prisoners. Kammler's role transcended mere observation. As the SS's chief construction administrator, he held direct responsibility for designing and building the facilities that would enable the final solution to the Jewish question, the Nazi euphemism for systematic genocide. The technical challenges were substantial. How does one design a facility capable of murdering thousands of people daily while maintaining the fiction of resettlement and labor deployment? How does one dispose of thousands of corpses in a manner that maximizes efficiency while minimizing evidence? These were the grotesque questions that Kammler's engineering mind addressed with clinical detachment. The blueprints that emerged from Kammler's office revealed a horrifying ingenuity. The gas chambers at Birkenau were disguised as shower facilities, complete with fake shower heads and signs in multiple languages, directing victims to undressing rooms. The crematoria incorporated multiple furnaces operating simultaneously, their chimneys designed to disperse smoke and reduce visible evidence of mass murder. Underground chambers facilitated the flow of victims from undressing areas to gas chambers to cremation, a macabre assembly line of death. Kammler personally approved the installation of elevators to transport corpses from gas chambers to furnace rooms, eliminating a bottleneck in the killing process. Documents discovered after the war, now housed in museums including the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, reveal the extent of Kammler's personal involvement. He corresponded directly with construction firms about specifications for cremation furnaces, negotiated contracts for ventilation systems capable of extracting Zyklon B gas, and resolved technical problems that arose during construction. In one chilling exchange from July 1942, Kammler's office discussed the load capacity of cremation facilities, bureaucratic language masking discussions about how many human beings could be murdered and disposed of per day. Beyond Auschwitz, Kammler's authority extended across the entire concentration camp system. At Majdanek near Lublin in Poland, he oversaw construction of additional gas chambers using both Zyklon B and carbon monoxide. At Mauthausen in Austria, he supervised the expansion of the Gusen subcamp, where prisoners were worked to death in underground armaments factories. At Dora Mittelbau in central Germany, he directed the excavation of massive tunnels into the Kohnstein mountain, creating a subterranean factory complex where thousands of concentration camp prisoners would later produce V-2 rockets under horrific conditions. The scale of Kammler's construction empire was staggering. By 1943, Office Group C controlled a workforce of hundreds of thousands of concentration camp prisoners, whom the SS treated as expendable resources. The construction projects killed thousands through overwork, starvation, and deliberate brutality. Kammler viewed prisoner deaths not as tragedies, but as actuarial problems, acceptable losses in the pursuit of construction targets. When site commanders complained about insufficient labor, Kammler's solution was to request more prisoner transports, feeding fresh victims into a system designed to consume them. Yet even as Kammler orchestrated mass murder through construction, his career was about to take an unexpected turn. In the summer of 1943, Hitler became increasingly obsessed with wonder weapons, advanced technologies that might reverse Germany's deteriorating military situation. The Allied invasion of Italy, the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, and the growing strength of the Red Army had shattered the illusion of inevitable German victory. Hitler demanded weapons that could strike terror into enemy populations and buy time for Germany to develop even more devastating technologies. On the evening of October 3, 1942, more than a year before Kammler would assume control, a revolutionary event occurred at a remote testing facility on Germany's Baltic coast. From Peenemünde, a research complex located on the island of Usedom, a 46-foot-tall rocket designated as the A4 roared skyward, propelled by liquid oxygen and alcohol fuel. It climbed 53 miles into the stratosphere before arcing back toward Earth and splashing into the Baltic Sea 190 miles from its launch site. This was humanity's first object to reach space, the forerunner of all modern rocketry, and it was designed explicitly as a weapon of mass destruction. The A4, later renamed the Vergeltungswaffe II or V2, Vengeance Weapon 2, represented a quantum leap in military technology. Unlike conventional artillery, which required enormous guns and could be easily detected and targeted, the V2 was essentially unstoppable once launched. It traveled faster than sound, making interception impossible with 1940s technology. It could strike targets hundreds of miles away with a 1-ton explosive warhead, carrying death from the sky without warning. The rocket's designer, Werner von Braun, envisioned it as the foundation for space exploration. The Nazi regime saw it as a terror weapon to punish civilian populations. By mid-1943, however, the V2 program faced severe difficulties. Despite years of development and enormous resource investment, production lagged far behind Hitler's demands. British intelligence had identified Peenemunde's purpose, and on the night of August 17 to 18, 1943, the Royal Air Force launched Operation Hydra, a massive bombing raid that killed hundreds of workers and temporarily disrupted research activities. Production facilities needed to move underground beyond the reach of Allied bombers. Someone needed to take charge of the entire program, research, production, and deployment, and drive it forward with ruthless efficiency. Heinrich Himmler saw an opportunity to expand SS power. The V2 program had been controlled by the German Army's weapons department, but Himmler convinced Hitler that the SS's proven organizational abilities and ideological reliability made them better suited to manage such a critical project. In August 1943, Hitler agreed, and Himmler immediately turned to the man who had proven his ability to complete impossible construction projects under extreme conditions, Hans Kammler. Kammler's appointment as Special Commissioner for A4 matters in August 1943 marked a decisive shift in the program's character. He brought to rocket production the same methods he had applied to concentration camp construction: slave labor, disregard for human life, and absolute focus on results regardless of cost. His first major decision was to accelerate construction of the Mittelwerk facility, a vast underground complex carved into the Kohnstein mountain near Nordhausen in central Germany. Here, protected from Allied bombing, V2 rockets would be mass-produced by concentration camp prisoners drawn from the newly established Dora Mittelbau camp. The conditions at Dora Mittelbau, documented extensively by survivors and historians including Jens Christian Wagner in his book Produktion des Todes, represented industrialized cruelty. Prisoners worked 12-hour shifts in the damp, poorly ventilated tunnels, excavating rock, installing machinery, and assembling rockets under the constant threat of beatings and executions. They slept in the tunnels themselves during the initial months, without adequate sanitation, medical care, or food. Thousands died from exhaustion, malnutrition, disease, and murder. According to United States Holocaust Memorial Museum records, approximately 60,000 prisoners passed through Dora Mittelbau between its establishment in August 1943 and its liberation in April 1945. At least 20,000 died, more than were killed by V2 strikes against Allied targets. Kammler drove the program forward with characteristic disregard for human suffering. When production quotas were missed, he ordered increased working hours and reduced rations. When prisoners were too weak to work, he ordered their selection for execution and their replacement with fresh transports from Auschwitz and other camps. When technical problems arose in rocket assembly, he brought in specialist engineers and gave them authority to use any means necessary to solve them, including testing dangerous procedures on prisoner work crews. The morning of September 8, 1944 began ordinarily in Chiswick, a residential district in West London. Families prepared breakfast, children readied for school, and workers commenced their daily routines. At precisely 6:43 without warning, a massive explosion erupted on Staveley Road, instantly killing 3 people and destroying several houses. Witnesses heard no approaching aircraft, no air raid sirens, just a double sonic boom followed immediately by devastating blast. Minutes later, another explosion struck Epping, 16 miles northeast of London. The V2 campaign against Britain had begun. By this date, Hans Kammler had consolidated control over Germany's entire long-range weapons program. In January 1944, He had been promoted to SS Obergruppenführer und General der Waffen SS, equivalent to a lieutenant general, and given expanded authority over all special projects, including the V-1 flying bomb and V-2 rocket. According to records examined by historian Michael J. Neufeld, Kammler commanded a sprawling empire that included research facilities, production plants, launching units, and tens of thousands of personnel, both military and enslaved. The V-2 offensive against London and later Antwerp, the Belgian port vital for Allied supply lines, reflected Kammler's operational philosophy: maximum destruction through technological superiority and relentless execution. Between September 1944 and March 1945, German forces launched approximately 3,000 V-2 rockets against Allied targets. More than 1,000 struck London, killing nearly 3,000 people and injuring over 6,000. Antwerp, critically important for supplying Allied armies advancing into Germany, endured even heavier bombardment, with approximately 1,600 V-2s striking the city and surrounding areas. Yet the V-2 campaign failed to achieve its strategic objectives. Despite the terror they inflicted, the rockets could not turn the tide of war. They were too inaccurate to destroy specific military targets, too few to overwhelm civil defense systems, and far too expensive relative to their destructive effect. Each V-2 cost approximately 100,000 Reichsmarks to produce, approximately equivalent to the cost of building several conventional bombers, but carried only 1 ton of explosives, less than a single bomber's maximum payload. The immense resources devoted to rocket production might have been more effective if invested in conventional weapons, fighter aircraft, or defensive fortifications. Historians have debated whether the V-2 program represents a strategic blunder, or whether the Nazis understood its limitations but pursued it anyway for psychological and propaganda purposes. Documents suggest Kammler believed in the rocket's potential, repeatedly proposing more advanced versions, including an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of striking New York City. Whether delusional or cynically manipulative, Kammler continued driving production and deployment, even as Germany's military situation became hopeless. By early 1945, Kammler's authority extended beyond rockets to include virtually all of Nazi Germany's advanced weapons programs. In February 1945, Hitler appointed him to oversee jet fighter production, giving him control over the Messerschmitt 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. This aircraft represented another technological breakthrough that arrived too late and in too few numbers to affect the war's outcome. Kammler applied his familiar methods: dispersed production facilities, slave labor, and ruthless pressure to increase output regardless of quality control or worker welfare. He also became involved with other experimental weapons, including potential development of atomic weapons. While Nazi Germany never came close to producing functional nuclear weapons, Kammler's office coordinated with physicists exploring uranium enrichment and reactor design. After the war, his knowledge of these programs would make him an extremely valuable intelligence asset, if he could be found. As the Third Reich collapsed around him, Kammler wielded extraordinary power within the Nazi hierarchy. He commanded combat troops in addition to his production empire, leading SS units in desperate defensive battles against the Red Army. He controlled knowledge of Germany's most advanced technologies and maintained personal relationships with scientists and engineers whose expertise the post-war world would desperately want. This combination of military command, technical knowledge, and organizational control made him one of the most powerful figures in the dying regime, and one of the most wanted men by approaching Allied forces. March 1945 brought devastating news that even Nazi propaganda could not conceal. American forces had crossed the Rhine River at Remagen, establishing a bridgehead on German soil that could not be eliminated. In the east, Soviet armies had reached the Oder River, positioning themselves less than 50 miles from Berlin. Italy had been lost, France liberated, and Germany's cities reduced to rubble by relentless Allied bombing. The Thousand-Year Reich, proclaimed with such arrogance in 1933, would survive barely 12 years. For Hans Kammler, the military collapse created both danger and opportunity. As an SS general deeply implicated in war crimes, he faced certain prosecution if captured by the Allies. The Soviets, who had liberated the death camps at Majdanek and Auschwitz, were documenting Nazi atrocities with meticulous care, and Kammler's name appeared prominently in captured documents. American and British intelligence services, meanwhile, were compiling lists of high-value targets, Nazi officials whose knowledge of advanced weapons programs made them priority captures. Yet Kammler possessed something that might save him: intimate knowledge of technologies the coming Cold War adversaries would desperately want. He knew where Germany's rocket scientists were located, which facilities contained critical research data, and how to operate and produce the V2 and other advanced weapons. In the emerging post-war world, this knowledge represented currency that might be traded for immunity, protection, or escape. During March and early April 1945, as Allied armies advanced from both east and west, Kammler moved constantly between his scattered facilities, issuing orders for the evacuation or destruction of sensitive installations. According to testimony from his subordinates collected by American investigators after the war, Kammler seemed increasingly erratic, alternating between grandiose plans for final victory and preparations for flight. He discussed relocating critical rocket research to Alpine fortresses, where fanatical SS units might continue resistance indefinitely. He ordered the evacuation of key scientists and engineers toward southern Germany and Austria, away from the rapidly advancing Red Army. In early April, Kammler arrived in the Harz Mountains of central Germany, where American forces were approaching the Mittelwerk facility and Dora Mittelbau concentration camp. The SS had already begun evacuating prisoners on death marches toward camps further south, killing thousands who could not maintain the pace. Production at Mittelwerk had effectively ceased, and Kammler ordered the destruction of sensitive documents before American arrival. On April 11, 1945, American troops of the 3rd Armored Division liberated Dora Mittelbau, finding approximately 700 critically ill prisoners too weak to evacuate, along with hundreds of corpses. Kammler was not among those captured. He had departed days earlier, traveling south toward Bavaria and Austria. Various accounts from German officers who encountered him during this period paint a picture of a man under extreme stress, still attempting to maintain authority even as the structures of Nazi power disintegrated around him. He reportedly threatened subordinates with execution for defeatism, while simultaneously discussing post-war plans that assumed German defeat. The Mittelwerk facility and its surrounding areas yielded an intelligence bonanza for American forces. Engineers and technical intelligence officers documented the underground production lines, recovered partially assembled V2 rockets, and located caches of technical documents that the SS had failed to destroy completely. More importantly, American teams began locating and securing German rocket scientists and engineers, implementing Operation Paperclip, a secret program to bring German technical experts to the United States, providing them immunity from war crimes prosecution in exchange for their knowledge. Werner von Braun, the V2's chief designer, had already surrendered to American forces on May 2, 1945, along with approximately 126 of his colleagues from the Peenemünde Research Center. Von Braun made a calculated decision to surrender to the Americans rather than the Soviets, correctly judging that the United States would offer better treatment and opportunities. The Soviet Union, meanwhile, secured its own contingent of German rocket experts, along with manufacturing equipment and technical documentation, laying the foundation for their own missile and space programs. As these scientists negotiated their post-war futures, the question of Hans Kammler's whereabouts became increasingly urgent. Unlike von Braun and other technical specialists, Kammler could not claim to be a mere scientist pursuing research. His role in concentration camp construction and slave labor made him an obvious war criminal. Yet his knowledge of German weapons programs and his administrative control over research facilities made him a high-value intelligence target. American, British, and Soviet intelligence services all sought him for very different reasons. April 1945 witnessed the death throes of Nazi Germany. Soviet artillery pounded Berlin, reducing Hitler's capital to rubble street by street. In the West, American and British forces swept across Bavaria and northern Germany, accepting the surrender of Wehrmacht units that preferred captivity to continued fighting. The concentration camps were opened one by one, revealing to the world the full extent of Nazi crimes. At Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen, and Dachau, Allied soldiers found tens of thousands of starving prisoners and mass graves containing countless victims. The liberation photographs shocked even hardened combat veterans and would soon force the world to confront the industrialized genocide perpetrated by the regime, now in its final collapse. Hans Kammler spent these chaotic final weeks in the region around Prague, Czechoslovakia, where he commanded SS units attempting to maintain order and resist advancing Soviet forces. By late April, his military command had become largely fictitious. Units existed on paper but had been destroyed, dispersed, or had surrendered. The vast industrial empire he had controlled had ceased to exist. Slave laborers had been liberated or had died on evacuation marches. Factories had been captured or destroyed. The scientists and engineers had fled or surrendered separately, making their own arrangements with approaching Allied forces. According to testimony provided after the war by SS officers who served under Kammler, he appeared in Prague during the final days of April 1945. Heinz Zeuner, one of Kammler's adjutants, later told American interrogators that Kammler discussed various escape plans, including fleeing to South America or attempting to negotiate with American forces, using his technical knowledge as leverage. Other witnesses reported that Kammler seemed resigned to Germany's defeat, but determined to avoid capture. The exact circumstances of Kammler's fate remain one of World War II's enduring mysteries, spawning numerous theories and claims. The official narrative, established by post-war German judicial authorities and accepted by many historians, states that Hans Kammler committed suicide on May 9, 1945, in the vicinity of Prague. This date is significant. May 8th was Victory in Europe Day, when Germany formally surrendered to the Allies, making May 9th the first day of post-war Europe. According to this version, Kammler shot himself rather than face capture, choosing the same exit taken by other high-ranking Nazis, including Heinrich Himmler, who killed himself with cyanide on May 23rd after British forces captured him. However, the evidence for Kammler's suicide is remarkably thin. No body was ever found or identified. No grave was located. The testimony supporting his death came primarily from Heinz Zeuner, who claimed to have witnessed the suicide and disposed of Kammler's body. Yet Zeuner's account contained inconsistencies and changed over time. In some versions, Kammler shot himself in a car, in others, in a field or building. The location varied in different tellings. No physical evidence corroborated any version of the story. Alternative theories emerged almost immediately after the war. Some researchers have suggested Kammler survived and escaped, possibly to South America, where numerous Nazi war criminals found refuge in the post-war decades. Argentina, Paraguay, and Brazil all harbored fugitive Nazis, including Adolf Eichmann, the architect of Holocaust logistics, who lived in Argentina under a false identity until Israeli agents captured him in 1960. Josef Mengele, the Auschwitz doctor who conducted horrific medical experiments, successfully evaded capture for decades, living in South America until his death by drowning in Brazil in 1979. Could Kammler have followed a similar path? The theory has proponents but little concrete evidence. Unlike Eichmann and Mengele, for whom various sightings and partial documentation existed before their ultimate discovery, Kammler left no verified post-war trail. No credible witness ever came forward claiming to have seen him after May 1945. No documents surfaced suggesting he established a new identity or life elsewhere. A more intriguing theory, first seriously proposed by historians in the late 20th century, and explored in detail by authors including Nick Cook in his book The Hunt for Zero Point, suggests that Kammler might have been captured by either American or Soviet intelligence services and granted protection in exchange for his knowledge of German advanced weapons programs. This theory aligns with the documented activities of Operation Paperclip and its Soviet equivalent, both of which granted immunity to German scientists implicated in war crimes when their expertise was deemed valuable. The immediate post-war period witnessed a dramatic shift in Allied priorities. The coalition that had united to defeat Nazi Germany began fracturing almost before Germany's surrender documents were signed. The United States and Great Britain, democratic powers that had allied with the Soviet Union from necessity rather than ideological affinity, now confronted the reality that their former ally represented a new threat. Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union controlled Eastern Europe, had ambitions for further expansion, and possessed the world's largest army. The atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 demonstrated the devastating power of nuclear weapons, and intelligence reports indicated the Soviets were aggressively pursuing their own atomic program. In this emerging Cold War context, German technical expertise suddenly became extraordinarily valuable. The side that secured the most talented scientists, the most complete research data, and the most advanced technologies would gain significant advantages in the coming confrontation. Both American and Soviet intelligence services launched aggressive operations to locate and secure German assets, often competing directly for the same individuals and materials. Operation Paperclip, sanctioned by President Harry Truman in August 1945, explicitly authorized the recruitment of German scientists despite their potential involvement in Nazi activities. The program's architects argued that preventing the Soviet Union from acquiring this expertise justified overlooking the moral complications of employing individuals who had worked for Hitler's regime. By the program's conclusion, approximately 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians had been brought to the United States, given security clearances despite background checks that revealed Nazi Party membership and other concerning affiliations, and put to work on American missile, aircraft, and weapons programs. Werner von Braun represented Operation Paperclip's most famous recruit. Despite his SS membership and his knowledge of slave labor conditions at Mittelwerk, conditions that directly resulted from his rocket designs, American authorities granted him immunity and brought him to the United States in September 1945. He would go on to lead the development of American ballistic missiles and later NASA's Saturn V rocket, which carried astronauts to the moon. His past was systematically obscured, his SS membership minimized, and his role in the V2 program recast as purely scientific rather than complicit in atrocity. If American intelligence agencies were willing to overlook von Braun's background for his technical expertise, might they have made similar calculations regarding Hans Kammler? This question forms the core of the intelligence hypothesis. Kammler possessed unique knowledge that went beyond any single scientist's expertise. He understood the entire German advanced weapons infrastructure, which facilities existed, which programs were most advanced, which personnel were most valuable, how production was organized, what technical challenges had been solved or remained unsolved. For an intelligence service trying to understand and potentially replicate German capabilities, Kammler represented a master key to the entire system. The secrecy surrounding Operation Paperclip and similar programs creates space for speculation. Numerous documents related to these programs remain classified or were destroyed. The full extent of who was recruited, what they were offered, and what they revealed may never be completely known. In this documented culture of secrecy and moral compromise, could Kammler's capture and protection have been concealed? Arguments supporting this theory include the lack of physical evidence for Kammler's death, the suspicious quality of testimony regarding his suicide, and the documented pattern of intelligence services protecting valuable Germans regardless of their criminal backgrounds. Author Joseph Farrell, in his book Reich of the Black Sun, argues that Kammler's comprehensive knowledge of German projects made him too valuable to prosecute, and that American intelligence may have spirited him away for debriefing and possible employment. However, significant problems undermine this hypothesis. First, unlike scientists such as von Braun, who could be presented as researchers following orders, Kammler was unambiguously a war criminal. His direct responsibility for concentration camp construction and slave labor programs was documented in captured German records. Protecting him would require not just overlooking his past, but actively concealing crimes that were among the most serious prosecuted at Nuremberg. Second, no documentary evidence has emerged suggesting American intelligence targeted Kammler for recruitment, or that he was ever in American custody. Third, Kammler's administrative knowledge, while valuable, was arguably less critical than the technical expertise of actual scientists and engineers. The Soviet hypothesis presents similar arguments. Soviet intelligence services operated with fewer ethical constraints than their American counterparts and aggressively recruited German experts regardless of their Nazi affiliations. The Soviet atomic bomb project, missile programs, and jet aircraft development all benefited from captured German knowledge. Could Kammler have fallen into Soviet hands and been taken to the Soviet Union? Again, while possible, no evidence supports this theory beyond speculation based on Soviet practices with other Germans. As Europe began its painful reconstruction in the months and years following Germany's surrender, various organizations launched investigations into Nazi war crimes, seeking to document what had occurred and identify those responsible. The International Military Tribunal at Nuremberg, which convened in November 1945 to try major war criminals, represented the most prominent of these efforts. 24 defendants faced charges of crimes against peace, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and conspiracy to commit these crimes. 12 received death sentences, including Hans Frank, Governor General of occupied Poland, and Alfred Jodl, Wehrmacht Chief of Operations. 3 received life imprisonment, 4 received lesser sentences, and 3 were acquitted. Hans Kammler's name appeared repeatedly in prosecution documents and witness testimony at Nuremberg, but he was not among the defendants. His absence was explained officially by his reported death in May 1945, though prosecutors noted the lack of confirmation. Survivors from Auschwitz, Dora Mittelbau, and other camps provided testimony describing the construction and operation of facilities that Kammler had overseen. Documents bearing his signature authorized expenditures for crematoria, approved blueprints for gas chambers, and directed the allocation of prisoner labor to various projects. Had Kammler been captured and tried, he would almost certainly have been convicted and executed. His direct involvement in crimes against humanity was indisputable, documented through his own administrative records. The prosecution at Nuremberg successfully argued that individuals who facilitated genocide through logistical and administrative support bore criminal responsibility equivalent to those who gave orders or committed physical acts of murder. Kammler's engineering expertise and bureaucratic efficiency had enabled mass killing on an unprecedented scale. Legal and moral culpability followed naturally. Beyond Nuremberg, other judicial processes targeted lower-ranking Nazi officials and camp personnel. The subsequent Nuremberg trials, held between 1946 and 1949, prosecuted doctors who conducted medical experiments, judges who perverted justice, industrialists who exploited slave labor, and military commanders who ordered atrocities. National courts in Poland, Germany, France, and other countries conducted thousands of additional trials. Israeli agents pursued fugitive war criminals, most famously capturing Adolf Eichmann in Argentina in 1960 and bringing him to trial in Jerusalem, where he was convicted and executed in 1962. Throughout these decades of investigation and prosecution, intelligence services and historians continued seeking information about Hans Kammler. American investigators interviewed hundreds of former SS officers and German military personnel who might have information about his whereabouts or fate. The Central Intelligence Agency, Federal Bureau of Investigation, and military intelligence units all maintained files on Kammler as part of broader efforts to track fugitive Nazis and understand German weapons programs. Declassified documents released in recent decades reveal the extent of this interest. A Central Intelligence Agency file on Kammler, partially released in 2007, contains reports from various sources claiming knowledge of his fate, though none provide definitive evidence. Some informants reported rumors that Kammler had escaped to Argentina or Spain. Others insisted he had committed suicide as officially claimed. A few suggested he had been captured by Soviet forces and taken to the Soviet Union. The file demonstrates active intelligence interest in Kammler extending into the 1950s, well beyond the period when most missing Nazis were presumed dead if not captured. Why this sustained interest? The Cold War provides context. Throughout the 1950s, American and Soviet missile programs competed intensely, building on German V-2 foundations. Both superpowers sought any remaining German expertise or documentation that might provide advantages. Even rumors about Kammler's survival or knowledge of his final days might yield intelligence value, particularly if he had concealed information about advanced projects or surviving personnel before his death or disappearance. The German judicial system also maintained interest in Kammler. Beginning in the 1950s, West German authorities conducted investigations into Nazi crimes, targeting individuals who had escaped immediate post-war justice. The Central Office of the State Justice Administrations for the Investigation of National Socialist Crimes, established in 1958 in Ludwigsburg, coordinated these efforts. Investigators compiled extensive files on concentration camp personnel, Einsatzgruppen commanders, and others implicated in genocide. Kammler's file grew substantial, documenting his career and crimes in detail, though it could proceed no further without locating him or definitively confirming his death. In 1965, German authorities officially declared Hans Kammler dead, a legal determination necessary to close his file and settle administrative matters. The declaration was based primarily on Heinz Zeuner's testimony regarding the suicide in Prague and the absence of any credible evidence of survival. However, historians and investigators continued questioning the official narrative, noting its weaknesses and the suspicious circumstances surrounding the lack of physical evidence. The 21st century brought renewed attention to Hans Kammler's case, driven by declassification of Cold War documents, advances in historical research methodologies, and continued public fascination with Nazi mysteries. In 2008, German researcher Rainer Karlsch published findings suggesting that Nazi Germany had conducted small-scale nuclear weapons tests in March 1945, a controversial claim that thrust Kammler back into headlines since he would have overseen any such program. While most physicists and historians reject Karlsch's nuclear test claims as unsupported by evidence, the controversy renewed interest in what Kammler knew and what happened to him. Authors and documentary filmmakers have produced numerous works exploring Kammler's career and disappearance. Nick Cook's The Hunt for Zero Point, published in 2001, investigated claims about German anti-gravity research and suggested Kammler might have been involved in exotic physics programs that American intelligence desperately wanted to acquire. While Cook's more speculative claims about Nazi flying saucers and anti-gravity technology lack credible evidence, his work on Kammler's conventional weapons programs and intelligence value proved more substantial, drawing on declassified documents and interviews with former intelligence officers. In 2015, German journalists Matthias Uhl and Dirk Siebert published research suggesting new possibilities regarding Kammler's fate. Working through recently opened archives in Germany and the Czech Republic, they documented Kammler's movements during April 1945 with greater precision than previously possible. Their work, reported in newspapers, including Der Spiegel, confirmed Kammler's presence in Prague in late April, but could not definitively resolve what happened afterward. They interviewed Czech witnesses who remembered German officers fleeing the city as Soviet forces approached, but none could specifically identify Kammler decades after the events. The same year, British author Ian Sayer announced he had discovered documents suggesting Kammler survived the war and lived under American protection. Sayer, who had previously researched Nazi gold and other World War II mysteries, claimed that Operation Paperclip had been broader than publicly acknowledged and that Kammler might have been among those secretly brought to the United States. However, Sayer did not produce the alleged documents for independent verification, and other researchers questioned his conclusions. The United States National Archives, which houses Operation Paperclip records, contains no evidence of Kammler's recruitment or presence in America. More recently, in 2018, a team of researchers led by historian Rainer Karlsch and journalist Matthias Uhl published findings from East German intelligence archives. According to documents preserved by the Stasi, East Germany's notorious secret police, Soviet intelligence services actively searched for Kammler in the immediate post-war period and continued surveillance of individuals who might know his whereabouts into the 1950s. The documents reveal that Soviet authorities considered Kammler extremely valuable, not just for his technical knowledge, but also as a potential witness against other Nazis who had escaped justice. However, these files contain no evidence that the Soviets ever located him. The archaeological and forensic dimensions of the Kammler case present unique challenges. Unlike many historical mysteries where physical evidence might resolve questions, Kammler's case lacks even basic material to examine. No grave site has been identified, no remains discovered, no physical artifacts definitively linked to his final days. This absence of evidence creates interpretative space for multiple theories, but provides no basis for definitive conclusions. Modern investigative techniques, including DNA analysis, could theoretically resolve the question if remains were located. However, the chaos of World War II's final days, the massive displacement of populations, and the deaths of millions make locating specific individuals extraordinarily difficult. Mass graves throughout Central Europe contain countless unidentified victims of war crimes, combat, and the chaotic collapse of the Nazi regime. Without specific location information, the chances of finding Kammler's remains approach zero. Some researchers have suggested examining records from South American countries, particularly Argentina, where Nazi fugitives are known to have settled. Immigration records, identity documents, and historical photographs might reveal evidence of Kammler under an assumed name. However, decades of investigation by Nazi hunters, journalists, and historians have produced no verified sightings. While absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, the complete lack of any credible post-war trail suggests that if Kammler survived, he either died soon afterward or maintained extraordinary operational security, far exceeding that achieved by other fugitive Nazis who were eventually discovered. The intelligence hypothesis remains impossible to definitively prove or disprove without access to potentially still classified documents. Both American and Soviet intelligence services maintained programs whose full extent remains obscure. The Central Intelligence Agency has acknowledged that some Operation Paperclip files remain classified, and Russian archives continue to hold documents not available to researchers. It is theoretically possible that evidence of Kammler's capture and fate exists in these restricted collections. However, given the gradual declassification of Cold War materials over decades, the continued absence of any Kammler-related revelations suggests that such documents, if they exist, contain no dramatic surprises. Perhaps the most likely explanation remains the simplest. Hans Kammler committed suicide in May 1945 as officially reported, and the lack of physical evidence results from the chaotic circumstances of Germany's collapse rather than conspiracy or cover-up. The inconsistencies in witness testimony may reflect the trauma and confusion of those final days, rather than deliberate deception. His body may have been hastily buried in an unmarked grave, consumed in one of the many fires that swept through European cities in war's final days, or simply lost amid millions of other casualties. This explanation lacks the drama of escape or intelligence recruitment, but aligns with what happened to many other Nazi officials who chose suicide over capture. Hans Kammler's story transcends the mystery of his disappearance to illuminate profound questions about technology, morality, and historical memory. His career embodied a distinctly 20th century horror, the application of advanced technical knowledge to industrialized genocide. While the Nazis hardly invented brutality or murder, they pioneered its rationalization through bureaucracy and its implementation through engineering. Kammler represented this fusion of technical expertise with moral depravity, a man who could optimize the efficiency of gas chambers with the same professional detachment another engineer might bring to designing bridges or factories. The post-war treatment of German scientists and engineers who worked for the Nazi regime raises uncomfortable ethical questions that remain relevant in the 21st century. Operation Paperclip and similar programs reflected calculated decisions that technical knowledge outweighed moral accountability. The United States government explicitly chose to employ individuals whose expertise might provide military advantages, even when those individuals had participated in or enabled atrocities. Werner von Braun built American rockets using knowledge gained through slave labor. Where does pragmatism end and complicity begin? These decisions established precedents that echo through subsequent conflicts and moral dilemmas. During the Cold War, American intelligence services recruited former Nazi intelligence officers to spy on the Soviet Union, providing protection to individuals responsible for war crimes in Eastern Europe. The CIA employed Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon responsible for torturing and murdering French resistance members and deporting Jews to death camps, as an intelligence asset in Bolivia. He evaded justice for decades before finally being extradited to France in 1983, tried, convicted, and imprisoned, dying in jail in 1991. The question of what society owes victims versus what advantage might be gained from perpetrators remains unresolved. Israel's capture and trial of Adolf Eichmann in 1960–62 demonstrated an alternative approach, pursuing justice regardless of time elapsed, bringing perpetrators to account even when politically inconvenient, and prioritizing moral accountability over strategic considerations. The trial attracted worldwide attention, educated a new generation about the Holocaust, and established important legal principles regarding crimes against humanity. Would similar treatment of captured Nazi scientists and engineers have served justice better than their recruitment to Cold War projects? Kammler's disappearance also highlights the imperfect nature of historical justice. The Nuremberg trials, while monumentally important, prosecuted only a fraction of those responsible for Nazi crimes. Thousands of perpetrators escaped accountability through death, suicide, false identities, or protection from intelligence services. The passage of time and death of witnesses and perpetrators eventually made prosecution impossible, even when individuals were located. This incomplete justice leaves historical wounds unhealed and questions unanswered. For Holocaust survivors and victims' families, the uncertainty surrounding Kammler's fate represents a particular cruelty. Unlike confirmed deaths or successful prosecutions, his ambiguous end provides no closure. Survivors from Auschwitz, Dora Mittelbau, and other camps knew that the man who designed their prisons and murder factories either escaped justice entirely through suicide or lived comfortably afterward, protected by states that valued his knowledge more than their suffering. This knowledge compounds the trauma of surviving genocide with the injustice of impunity. The technical legacy of Kammler's projects presents equally troubling dimensions. The V-2 rocket that killed thousands in London and Antwerp, built through slave labor that killed many more, became the foundation for space exploration and intercontinental ballistic missiles. The Apollo program that landed humans on the moon descended directly from German rocket technology. The missiles that defined Cold War strategic balance and continue to underpin nuclear deterrence today trace their lineage to weapons Kammler supervised. Can we celebrate technological achievement while acknowledging its origins in atrocity? This moral complexity extends to individual scientists and engineers who worked on these projects. Many claimed they pursued pure research, interested only in technical problems rather than applications. Wernher von Braun insisted throughout his life that he dreamed of space exploration, not weapons, and that political circumstances forced him to develop military rockets. Yet he joined the Nazi Party voluntarily, accepted SS membership, and visited Mittelwerk, where his rockets were built by dying prisoners. Technical expertise does not erase moral responsibility, and claims of political naivety ring hollow when the consequences were so visible and horrific. For contemporary society, Kammler's story offers sobering lessons about the ethical obligations of scientists, engineers, and technical professionals. The 20th century demonstrated repeatedly that technical capability without moral constraint produces catastrophe. Nuclear weapons, chemical and biological warfare, surveillance technologies, and autonomous weapons all present situations where technical possibility confronts ethical limitation. The choices made by engineers working on these technologies carry weight beyond professional advancement or intellectual curiosity. Professional codes of ethics in engineering and science emerged partly in response to World War II revelations about how technical expertise had been corrupted. Organizations including the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers and the American Association for the Advancement of Science developed guidelines emphasizing engineers' responsibilities to public welfare and human rights. These principles assert that technical professionals cannot claim neutrality, that they bear responsibility for foreseeable consequences of their work, and that some applications of knowledge should be refused regardless of career implications or legal compulsion. Yet enforcement of these principles remains imperfect. Engineers and scientists continue working on controversial military projects, surveillance systems, and technologies with potentially harmful applications. The defense that, if I don't do it, someone else will, echoes arguments made by Nazi technical personnel. The line between legitimate national defense work and participation in potential atrocities remains contested and context-dependent. Kammler's extreme example illuminates these dilemmas without resolving them. The historical memory of figures like Kammler also raises questions about how societies remember and commemorate past atrocities. Germany has confronted its Nazi past more directly than perhaps any other nation has addressed historical crimes, through education, memorialization, and continued prosecution of aging perpetrators into the 21st century. This process of Vergangenheitsbewältigung, coming to terms with the past, acknowledges that historical truth matters, that victims deserve recognition, and that societies must actively resist forgetting. Other nations have been less willing to confront their own historical crimes with similar honesty. This selective memory allows comfortable national narratives that exclude uncomfortable truths. The career of Hans Kammler, from respected engineer to architect of genocide to vanished fugitive, demonstrates the importance of maintaining historical accuracy even when inconvenient or painful. Only through unflinching examination of how educated, technically skilled individuals became complicit in industrial murder can societies develop immunity against similar corruption in the future. As of 2025, 80 years after World War II's end, the generation with direct memory of these events has nearly passed. The last survivors of Nazi concentration camps are now in their 90s or older. Soon, historical memory will depend entirely on documentation, education, and commemoration, rather than living testimony. This transition makes historical accuracy increasingly important and creates space for denialism and distortion if societies fail to maintain vigilance. The case of Hans Kammler, SS general, concentration camp architect, rocket program administrator, and mysteriously vanished war criminal, remains unsolved. Whether he died by suicide in Prague in May 1945, escaped to South America, or was captured and protected by intelligence services may never be definitively determined. But the historical significance of his career requires no such resolution. His story stands as testament to how technical brilliance can serve evil purposes, how bureaucratic efficiency can facilitate genocide, and how incomplete justice allows perpetrators to escape accountability. In the end, Kammler embodies a particularly modern horror, the technocrat of terror, applying professional expertise to mass murder with the same detachment brought to any engineering problem. His disappearance adds mystery to infamy, but the mystery should not obscure the documented facts of his crimes. Tens of thousands died in concentration camps he designed and administered. Thousands more perished under rockets he produced through slave labor. His victims deserve remembrance. His crimes demand acknowledgement. Whether his bones rest in an unmarked Prague grave, or he lived decades longer under false identity, matters less than ensuring his role in history's darkest chapter remains clearly understood and never forgotten. The unanswered questions surrounding Hans Kammler's fate ultimately pale before the answered ones about his actions. We may never know with certainty how or when he died, but we know beyond doubt what he did while alive. That knowledge, preserved through documentation and testimony, serves as warning and obligation for future generations to ensure such corruption of technical expertise never recurs. In remembering Kammler, we remember not just one man's crimes, but the systematic evil that transformed a modern, educated society into an engine of genocide. And we commit ourselves to preventing history's darkest lessons from being forgotten or repeated.